Have you ever looked around one day and realized you barely talk to anyone anymore? Not because you're busy. Not because you moved away. But because something just shifted. People you used to laugh with feel distant. Conversations feel forced. And the weirdest part, you didn't even have a big fight. They just faded. And if you're honest, there's a quiet thought sitting in the back of your mind that you don't say out loud. Is something wrong with me? Because everyone else seems to be surrounded by people. And you're slowly losing yours. But here's the part nobody tells you. What if losing friends as you grow older isn't a sign that you're falling behind, but the first sign that you're actually moving forward? And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why that happens, and why it feels so uncomfortable while it's happening. There's a very specific kind of loneliness that hits when you're not alone, but you feel like you are. You're in a group chat, but you don't respond anymore. You hang out, but you're slightly quieter than you used to be. You laugh, but half the time, it feels automatic. And if you've ever sat in a room full of people and still felt completely invisible, you know exactly what this feels like. It's not that you don't care about them. It's that something inside you has changed, and you don't fully understand what. So you start overthinking. Am I becoming boring? Am I pushing people away? Why does everything feel off? And here's the uncomfortable truth. You're not losing people because you're becoming less. You're losing people because you're becoming more specific. But that's not even the strangest part. There's a famous psychological study called the Ash conformity experiment. In simple terms, researchers put people in a group where everyone intentionally gave the wrong answer to an obvious question, like matching lines that clearly didn't match. And most people, they went along with the group anyway. Not because they were stupid, but because the human brain is wired to avoid social rejection at almost any cost. Now here's where it gets interesting. When even one person in the group chose to stand by the correct answer, others suddenly felt safe enough to do the same. In other words, most people aren't being real. They're just staying accepted. And this is where your problem begins. Because as you grow older, you slowly stop wanting to play along. You start noticing fake laughs, forced opinions, conversations that go nowhere. And something in your brain just goes, I can't do this anymore. Which sounds like growth. But it comes with a cost most people aren't ready for. There's a version of you that existed purely to fit in. You laughed at things you didn't find funny. You agreed just to keep the peace. You shaped yourself depending on who you were around. That's not weakness, that's survival. Your brain is literally wired for it. It's part of something called social conditioning, where your behavior adapts to avoid rejection. But as you grow, something shifts. You stop performing. And here's the problem, most relationships were built on that performance. So when you change, the dynamic breaks. People don't always know how to connect with the real you because they got used to the version that made things easy. And suddenly, you feel like the outsider in relationships that used to feel natural. It's not because you're harder to love. It's because you're harder to fake around. And that changes everything, but we haven't even touched the deeper reason yet. This is where it gets a little deeper. As you mature emotionally, your brain becomes less stimulated by surface-level interaction. There's actual neuroscience behind this. Your dopamine system, what drives interest and reward, starts responding less to repetitive, low-meaning interactions. Small talk, gossip, empty conversations. They stop hitting the way they used to. And if you've ever found yourself zoning out mid-conversation thinking, why are we even talking about this? That's not you being rude. That's your brain craving depth. Most people don't reach this point because they stay in familiar patterns. But people who think the way you do, they start needing something real. And the moment that need becomes stronger than your need to belong, you begin to outgrow entire groups. Which sounds powerful. But it also gets lonely in a way nobody prepares you for. Here's something nobody says out loud. Your energy is limited. And deep down, you know it. So you start becoming selective. Not in a judgmental way. In a survival way. Psychologists call this a shift in emotional investment filtering. Your brain starts prioritizing interactions that actually give something back. And suddenly, you don't have the energy for constant messaging, pointless hangouts, or one-sided friendships. And yes, people notice. They might think you've changed. That you've become distant. But what's really happening is simpler than that. You've stopped giving your time to things that drain you. And if you're honest, you've probably replayed conversations in your head where you felt exhausted afterward, like you just gave too much of yourself away. So now you pull back. And that distance, it starts separating you from people who only knew how to connect with the version of you that overgave. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. This is the part people avoid thinking about. Not all friendships are deep. Some are just proximity. School. Work. Routine. You saw each other every day, so it felt like connection. But when life changes, those friendships quietly dissolve. Not because anyone did something wrong. But because there was nothing underneath holding it together. And the moment you step out of that shared environment, the silence starts. You stop texting first. They don't reach out either. And weeks turn into months. It feels personal, but it's not. It's structural. And realizing that, it hits harder than any argument ever could. Because now you're forced to ask yourself, who actually chose me, when they didn't have to? And the answer to that question is usually smaller than you expected. But that's not the worst part. Most people think relationships end because of drama. But the truth is, most of them end because of growth. You change your mindset. Your priorities shift. Your tolerance for certain behaviors drops. And suddenly, conversations that used to feel normal, feel off. Not toxic. Just misaligned. It's like you're speaking the same language, but it doesn't mean the same things anymore. And here's the quiet part that stings. Sometimes you don't even want to fix it. Not because you don't care. But because you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed it. That's a hard thing to admit. Because it makes you feel like you're the one leaving people behind. But the reality is, you're not leaving them. You're just not staying the same for their comfort. And that shift, it's where everything starts to change. At some point, you start noticing patterns. Who only reaches out when they need something? Who doesn't really listen? Who subtly drains you without ever giving anything back? This is where something called rejection sensitivity and pattern recognition kick in. Your brain starts connecting dots it used to ignore. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So you pull back. Not dramatically. Not aggressively. Just, quietly. And if you've ever slowly distanced yourself from someone without explaining why, that's this. It's not that you hate them. You just understand them now. And understanding someone deeply, sometimes means realizing they're not good for you. That realization doesn't feel empowering. It feels heavy. But it's necessary. Because the next part is where things finally make sense. Most people measure their social life by numbers. How many friends? How many messages? How many plans? But people who grow the way you're growing, they start measuring something else. Alignment. Do you feel understood? Can you be quiet without it being awkward? Do you feel like you have to shrink yourself, or not? And suddenly, one real connection feels better than 10 shallow ones. That's not losing. That's refining. And yeah, it looks like loneliness from the outside. But from the inside, it feels like clarity. And that's the part most people never reach, because they're too afraid to sit through the silence it takes to get there. Here's the truth that flips everything. You're not bad at keeping friends. You're just no longer compatible with who you used to be. And science actually backs this up. As your identity becomes more defined, your tolerance for misalignment drops. Your brain literally filters out what doesn't match your internal values. So what feels like loss is actually selection. It's your mind narrowing the field. Not everyone is meant to grow with you. And not everyone is supposed to stay. The painful part isn't that people leave. It's that you finally understand why they had to. And once you see it that way, it stops feeling like failure. It starts feeling like direction. So if your circle is getting smaller, if your phone feels quieter, if you sometimes wonder where everyone went, nothing went wrong. You just stopped settling for connection that doesn't feel real. And yeah, that comes with nights where it feels a little too quiet. Moments where you question everything. But those moments, they're not emptiness. They're space. Space for the kind of people who don't just fill time, but actually understand you. And I mean this. It's better to feel alone because you're being real than surrounded because you're pretending. That's a trade most people never have the courage to make. But you did, even if you didn't realize it yet. If this felt a little too accurate, like someone just put words to something you've been quietly experiencing, then this channel is probably for you. Not the surface level stuff. The real reasons behind why you think the way you do, and why it feels so different from everyone else. So subscribe, not because you have to, but because you've already started asking the kind of questions most people avoid. And we're just getting started. Because the more you understand yourself, the less confusing everything else becomes.